guys, welcome to Clockwork Dan to Noodles and welcome to Clockwork Rewind, which really fits the nature of the episode. Jump back, straight back in time. Such a good fitting start with this episode. 12 years into the past, we're going to meet up with young Becca and we're going to go back and rewatch something that I watched a very long time ago. Rewind is all going to be about going back into the past. We're going to be watching shows that I have already seen, minor spoilers. So if you haven't seen the shows up ahead, I'm not going to do big spoilers. I'm not about to go and ruin the ending of Steins Gate for you. It's not the point. Some spoilers because of course this isn't my first watch, and it's also why I like to do seasonal stuff. You get a more fresh view of me watching something and not really experiencing it before. But hello and welcome to Clockwork Dan to Noodles. I break down anime every single week. Now the new season didn't have too much for me. I'm breaking down 2 other shows. Instead of having a spare gap, I decided let's go and look at some of my favourite all-time animes. Most of my favourite shows aren't modern, so it's going to be great to talk to you guys about some stuff that is in the past. You may not have even been watching anime back 12 years ago. You may not have actually seen this show, so me going through it might spark some interest in you watching this show. Today we are breaking down Steins Gate. Get excited. Episode 1 had to be Steins Gate because we are starting off this concept of jumping back into the past, the king of time travel. There's been shows afterwards which have done time travel type stuff, but nothing to the same degree that blew up in the same way. It wasn't the first to do it, but it was the first to do it in such a way that got everyone's attention. Please make sure you guys are subscribed. Every single week I'm breaking down a different show, a different first episode. It's first episodes only. Next week will be something completely different. I will announce the day before, so around Friday night, what I'm going to be breaking down so you guys can get hyped and excited, or it gives you a chance to even watch the first episode too. Today was a different one. I basically gave you about an hour. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. I hope you're excited as I am to jump back into the past. 12 years ago to April. Where was I at this period of time? I actually didn't watch Steins Gate when it first came out, but I watched it probably about 4 years later, around 2015-16 time. I was in uni. I had only probably watched about 20 animes by this point, not very many. My first ever anime, Full Moon vs. Sagashiti. It was Searching for the Full Moon. For the whole show, 9 out of 10 was my score. Mal's list is 9.07 out of 10, which means it's basically 9 out of 10. My score is actually equal to what Mal also thought. It's only 1 episode compared to the whole lot. I still would give the opening episode for Steins Gate still a solid 9 out of 10. Steins Gate is my 6th favourite anime of all time. Steins Gate is on there. It's always been on there. It's been on there for a very long time. It's stayed and it's held its place. I have the app which came out with the 2nd season of Steins Gate, which has Christina on it. I will be referring to Karisu as Christina in this episode. It's a nickname. I prefer Ocarina. Also mentioned that the OP of this one always featured on top 100 animes of all time. The OP for this show is just insane. Still have it on my phone. I didn't even remember the ED, so I will say when I got to the ED of this episode, I was like, oh, that's a thing. So I guess at the time I didn't pay attention to the ED. I don't normally cut off when it comes to EDs. It's a possibility. Back in the day, Becca wasn't as seasoned with anime, so she might have just gone, screw it, and ended it just there. So let's jump straight into that opening shot. The world is so desaturated, and it's not just because it's the early 2000s. You're not on the main timeline. It's a non-linear anime. Sometimes the scenes don't always line up. The scenes eventually make sense later on. I would say with the actual show, to Kyoma, it is the opening. For everybody else in the show, the actual opening is later in the episode. Having a desaturated palette shows you that something is a little bit weird. Something doesn't look right. All those colours are very contrasty. They open on the finite nature of time and space, which immediately sets what we're going into. You know this is going to be a science anime. You know we're dealing with some very heavy stuff. I do like the initial open. I think it is such a classic open where you're just thrown straight into it. The blues are very blue. It's like a colour pop, but instead of red, which is always used, it's blue. The sky being oversaturated is where we first meet Miyuri. Even after all these years, I do remember the sky being saturated. I remember it being very, very blue. After watching the whole show, the open means something completely different. I'm not going to spoil it. Watching the open again with a lot of the knowledge from the other seasons, it does hit different. So I am glad I'm doing this. I don't want to do the whole show. It's really just to go back for the episode and get a kind of flavour for it. The repeat watch definitely helps with the conference scene. You start remembering exactly what's going on, and of course a few things that happen in this episode hit a little bit differently, and I'm glad for that because sometimes things hit differently and it's bad. I would say with the knowledge I hold, it hits in a good way. We have this nice build up to the sequence with the conference. It's still really saturated. Everything's really dark. I don't remember what was actually airing at this point because, again, like I said, I had watched like 20 shows for the whole year. Now I watch 20 shows a season. The first opening sequence, it establishes our relationships very quickly with Miyuri and Ocarine. I think they're the core relationship. Even later on, it's a very important relationship that drives a lot of the plot. It's nice to have this established quite quickly that they're childhood friends. You get to see the more carefree nature of Miyuri. She's very laid back, she's very carefree. I think certain things with her hit different a little bit later on because of how she is as a character. The importance of the metal Upa obviously means a lot more to me, but on first watch it's nice because you get to see Miyuri's face reflected in the metal. Happy and excited she is because this is a very rare moment for her. It could also be a nice metaphor because it is still a show about science, about the idea of rarity and odds. A lot of the stuff in the show will always have this nice link to something in the real world when it comes to science, and I guess the only real thing that's close in the current airing realm this year is Dr. Stone, but it's nowhere near the same. A lot of the times when I'm watching Dr. Stone, as much as it takes itself really seriously, I also don't take it very seriously because it's very hard to believe. Steins Gate is very much, it's based in the realm of science. Very quickly you pick up on the fact that, or things that make quite enough sense. You know something's going on because something ain't right. The colours aren't right. I initially did watch the show as a younger Becca. I didn't know who John Titor was. If you don't know who John Titor was, you probably won't get that much from this next sequence, but they do mention a lot of it anyway, mainly that he's a guy who cropped up in 2000s. He claimed to be a time traveller, and this was actually real. I did actually watch a video on it. I think it was from Simon Whistler did a episode on time travel, whether it was possible, whether it was real, and he did mention John Titor, sadly dismissing it, but it was at the time a big thing because he came and claimed that he was from the future and he had information. You see the guy at the front actually saying that he's a fake. Obviously, you can see that Ocarine doesn't hold the same school of thought. I would also say that with the idea of the time traveller also being very heavy foreshadowing because it's also very relevant to the plot we're about to go into. The Christina section, when we meet her for the first time, is your first big, very obvious hint that something isn't right and something time travel-y is actually going on. Obviously, we're here for a conference about time travel. Christina says, 15 minutes ago, you tried to tell me something. What was it? You were following Ocarine. Up until this point, he was 15 minutes ago trying to get the Upa from the machine, or maybe he was sitting in the conference 15 minutes ago. You, the audience, go, wait, something isn't quite adding up. She is 100% saying that this guy came to her, tried to speak to her. At this point, the palette is still, of course, desaturated. The heavy desaturated palette really does help this anime in a sense where it does still feel like I'm watching a really old anime, but it stylizes and fits, especially when they're dealing with the screen a bit later on. I think that really works. We're looking through a screen, it's going to be grainy. It's aged well. At this point, I quickly want to give a nod to Miyano Mamoru, who his acting, I remember always being wild. It stood out to me. He was a very loud voice. He was very out there. He was the mad scientist, a really fun main character. To link it back to the channel, we recently broke down Zombieland Saga. He is the producer in that, and again, he's just that same very loud character. Ocarine stands out as a main character, and a very interesting main character at that. Off the wall, but at the end, you realise that he's very smart and he's not as off the wall as you think he is. Having him in this show is just a bonus. You've got a very good cast. The metal Upa by this point coming back round again. It's a very important plotline. All the tiny details mean something, and there's a lot of the smoking gun theory where if you show it, you have to use it. That couldn't be more true when it comes to an anime like this. The scene is also very important because it shows you that Ocarine also needs cash. The lab is, of course, self-funded. Definitely helps to establish things like relationships, the kind of character that he is, the relationship between him and Miyuri. Let's talk about Christina's first episode death. As a first watcher, I was like, oh my god, you've killed off a very important character who I know is in the poster in episode 1. And my mind was just blown. At this point, nobody had seen Game of Thrones. Killing off a main character very early was not that widely done. But I remember it being one of my first shows where a main character quickly died. This is the kind of show I'm dealing with. It's the rug pull moment where you start to know that this show is dark. This show is getting deep. There's a mystery going on. It's so quick, but you're in the poster. This is really, really weird. This is also the first time that the music starts to ramp up and you actually hear the music for the first time nearly halfway in, where you start getting a little bit of a soundboard because the music isn't needed. The whole open is done with sound effects of the cicadas, I think they're called. You get those guys chirping. It's really hot. That keeps coming back over and over again, which I think also plays into how saturated the sun is and how saturated the environment is. The midway rug pull where you have the first loop, I think that's when everybody sits to attention. Everyone goes, okay, This is the kind of show we're dealing with. We're going to go back. The satellite crashes into the building. As a first-time audience, you suddenly put the pieces together because you quickly work out that the conference was cancelled. It never occurred. That stabbing never took place. So Christina is still alive. Steins Gate's first episode is really, really different in a sense because it doesn't waste any time setting out a rug pull, a loop. This is going to be a non-linear plot. This is the thing at the core. Christina did die in this first loop. And first episodes that definitely stand out. The Dr. Pepper scene as well was really, really fun because back in the day, it did seem like a lot of older shows, older animes would have a lot of sponsors hidden in them. Another one coming to mind is Code Geass. Pizza Hut, they were everywhere. And there's a scene where it's random, but C2 is just there eating pizza. There is a lot of Dr. Pepper in this show. I like Dr. Pepper, and I always remember this show for Dr. Pepper. Before we roll into that famous OP, Ocarine on the crosswalk, and then everyone vanishes, and it goes from saturated to just black and white almost. This isn't a real space that we're dealing with, so the fact that it doesn't look quite right, I think you get away with it. You're getting thrown back into the start. Now all the people are back here again. We've jumped a week. The famous OP, of course, Hacking the Gate. I was singing along to this. Everyone knows this song. You could hum it. Once you hear it once, you're like, oh, maybe I have heard it in one of those top 10 lists or something. It's such a good speed. It's such a good vocals. It's thematically, it works. It's all about science. There's equations everywhere. Very similar to the new Dr. Stone stuff going on where you've got the equations everywhere. Science is in the forefront. Symbolism going on with the idea of the butterfly effect where you change one thing and everything changes, which is very important to a plot like this. Lots and lots of very nice heavy saturated science. It feels like we're moving in. If I was saying that the OP was moving, it's moving down. It feels like we're spiraling, all part of science, the golden ratio and stuff like that. I still remember this song and I have it on my phone, as I said. There's so many good moments of foreshadowing too, where we see the multiple ocarines, multiple characters in the same frame. I don't want to give too much away. I feel like I want to go through this, but at the same time I'm telling you, very, very important when it comes to seeing multiple ocarines on the screen at the same time. It's a classic. It holds up. I really do think this is still such a gold OP. Sure, I think OPs and EDs are getting better. I think the songs are getting better, but the way they wrote this, gold. Jumping into the second half is when you start to get some pretty decent colours. The colours are up a little bit. They're still a little desaturated, but not supposed to be a very bright anime with the colours all in your face. It's still quite a dark anime. We are now essentially following our main plot. We're back in the proper current time where all the characters, if you were to ask them, that would be that day. See, Ocarine's the only person, and us, the audience, who knows that another plot line has occurred. Ocarine does the first proper introductions halfway through the episode. This is this person, this is who this is, and it's a very clever way of doing it. It's not just an info dump. He's talking to a screen that obviously then leads very nicely into Daru and about him and his love for 2D waifus, which is great because a character like him has never got old. He's such a cool character. I do like Daru. Daru is so funny. He does bring a lot of the comic relief when it comes to this show because this show gets very heavy at times. It's a very dark show. There's a reason why we're desaturating those colours. It's not supposed to be bright and colourful. The first person point of view where we are the person watching through the screen, which is very fourth wall break going on there. Very clever, very meta. And I just love the fact that he's acting to us, the audience. We do get a very nice little look at the brain in the database theory, what leads into the 2D wife debate. But the idea of the brain in a jar is that you would never know if you were just simply a character on a screen. I think in philosophy we say that if your mind was plugged in and you were a brain in a jar, you were in a simulation, you just wouldn't know. Like right now, I could be talking to just no one. You guys could all be part of a simulation. We studied this theory at about 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, very early in the week, and you had your brain melted like a green banana, and it was just, whoa, this is a very heavy topic. But what I think is quite nice with Steins Gate is linking this quite heavy theory to the anime 2D waifu thing. Makes it accessible to the audience. It makes the science less daunting. A very relevant scientific theory thrown in on top of it. Shock horror, the conference never happened moment, which is great because again it means Christina isn't dead, smiley face. It was just a very nice hook though. Having her die that early into the episode, very shocking thing for a first time watcher. I definitely think it hit me. I was like, oh, she's dead. What's going on? I was really confused. To a second time watcher, a nice relief knowing what's coming later on. But it's really only us and Ocarine who are on the same page. Us, the audience, we witnessed what he went through. Nobody else remembers. You, the audience, saw it, and we know what we saw. Now, the chemistry between the original three has always been something that I've really enjoyed. They just get on. This nice little homie sequence where they're in the lab chilling out. We've got the cosplayer sewing. Which I still think I'm Christina. Probably am. Miyuri. I don't know, I'm probably a mixture of both. I'm just Miyuri and I'm also Christina because I think I have that sass. As grumpy as her at times, which isn't a good thing. The relationship between these three is just great. I love the fact that the relationship between Daru and Ocarine is quite a believable one because when he's going through how long they've known each other for, he does state like, oh, we were in different classes, so technically that doesn't actually count. It feels relatable. So I know this person, but we didn't get close until this year, or we didn't start talking until after this. And that feels very relatable. I still think the relationship between these two just feels real. In more current animes or some shows where two people are suddenly just thrown together and they are supposed to know each other, they don't always act like they've known each other for a long time. These guys, you can feel they're bantering with each other. He's taking a jab at his 2D wife. I will promise that the relationship with Miyuri does get developed a bit later on. To the first time watcher, you're like, whoa, she's a hostage. I promise you it's wholesome. I promise you it's just a really wholesome little thing that they've come up with for being childhood friends. That would probably be quite shocking to a first time watcher. Vital scene where we get the gel bananas. Now, initially it seems like it has no meaning because they even say, we've done it a few times already. Nothing's actually happened. We just get these really gooey bananas at the end of it. Nothing really comes of it. It's not played up big or anything. There's a conversation going on over the scene, which you more tune in on, and Miyuri's just kind of chill looking at it. The composition of the sequence as well, we're more focused on her than anything else. It's a very important sequence, but it's just not drawn attention to. This is why this show is really good. It doesn't always draw attention to the things that you should be looking at. It does help us draw attention to how pervy Daru can be. It's just a cherry on top of the episode where he tries to make her say something that double entendre has two meanings. I remember loving the fact that all of the prototypes in the lab had the name is subject to change aspect. I think it's great because it also shows you the kind of person that he is. He names things on a whim, but he knows that he's going to come back later and probably give it a new name. I like that. It's got a very nice amateur lab student-y feel to it. We're going to close on the perhaps biggest rug pull for episode 1, the biggest hook that then hopefully gets you to watch the second episode. Ocarine realizing that he sent a text about the stabbing and Daru got it, but Daru got it a week ago. There has been time travel. The plot starts to build, the music is back again, and boom, Christina is alive and okay. And you suddenly realize that it now makes sense because she said, you saw me 15 minutes ago and you tried to tell me something. What was it? I will admit now that the ED, I didn't remember the ED whatsoever. I do think it's nice. I think it fits. I think it's got a nice close to it. It closes everything back down again. Also has Christina at the core. Very important for the plot, especially because she is pretty much core to everything going on. Do I think it holds up? Yes. It's darker than I remember it. Dark palette compared to what I remember. Equally as weird as I remember. It's quite a jarring open for an anime. You drop in, nothing really makes sense. They say very little to each other. It just drops in where we're talking about the idea of time and space, but you can see that Ocarina is talking on his phone. Like, well, who's he talking to? And then obviously Christina says she's talking to no one. Is he ever talking to someone? Steins Gate is a really good show. A rite of passage when someone's watched enough anime, if they're new, they should definitely go back and watch Steins Gate because I think it holds up. The animation isn't as slick as our newer stuff, but it's doing something very clever, and because of the nature of it being time-based and a lot of jumping back and forth, I feel like you can get away with the slightly grainier images. It's not as sharp and not as crisp as it would be nowadays. I absolutely love Steins Gate, and it definitely deserves that 6th place on my list. Obviously, it just gets better and better, but episode 1 is impactful. You go into it, there's a death, time travel mentioned in your face quite often, and then at the end, when you get that realization that actually time travel has occurred, it's such a unique concept. Having you on the same level as Ocarine is just genius because you both know. You saw that sequence. You saw that line of events happen. You saw her die. But none of the other characters remember it. Every single character brushes it off. It's a very clever way of having the audience relate to a character quickly by having them share a moment together. That was fun, guys. I had to admit, I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys also had fun. Let me know in the comments below did you watch it originally? Have you seen it? Did you also enjoy Steins Gate? What were you doing at the time when it came out? Because it was 12 years ago. If you haven't watched Steins Gate, would you be interested in checking out? Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you're looking after yourselves. And till we meet again, El Sai Congro.